Comfortably Zoned Radio Network presents Remembering Dynasty with Peter Golenbock.
We're back, remembering Dynasty, bums, and a whole lot more with Peter Golenbock. Good evening, Peter. How are you, sir?
Fabulous. Just fabulous, Ralph. Just great.
Oh, good.
Spring training is here. The season's right around the corner. Things couldn't be better.
Beautiful. How do you follow your Yankees? Definitely your favorite team, of course. How do you follow
I live
the
in
Yankees?
St. Petersburg.
Right, but
the Tampa Bay Rays. The Tampa Bay Rays are 7 minutes from my home. I have season tickets to the Tampa Bay Rays. So certainly I follow the Yankees with great interest. But when you live in the same town, I know we've got a lot of transplants down here who have refused to root for the Rays, but it's just stupid. You got an opportunity to see your hometown team play, and, you know, I've been here since the Rays started playing in 1998. It's crazy not to be a Rays fan, and so I am a Tampa Bay Rays fan.
Well, I can identify with rooting for a team that may not be there.
That's right. You had the New York Giants that, you know, unlike the Rays, who were going to stay in Tampa Bay, the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers had the effrontery to leave New York City and go to the West Coast, which I have to tell you, every Brooklyn Dodger fan and New York Giant fan I've ever known, to this day, most of them are now in their 60s and 70s, not one of them has ever forgiven Stoneham or O'Malley for taking their team away.
No, because most of them had their team taken away when they were really young kids at this point. And that's the crime. You know, looking back, of course it was personal, but it wasn't just me affected. And I am just amazed in doing these shows in how much passion the Brooklyn people feel still for the Dodgers. Giants, not so much. There's not that much passion. As a matter of fact, the Giants out in San Francisco honor the New York Giants more than the Mets, who built a ballpark that looks like Ebbets Field, and but the Giants have the New York Giants have a beautiful display of recognition at AT&T Park in San Francisco. But the issue is, why? Because the Giants were my home team as a kid, and then the Mets came in. I moved out. I spent my adult life in California, still rooting for the Mets, but I'm a Giant apologist. So sometimes the colors are, to answer that question, as to why a Yankee fan living in St. Petersburg, can't root for any other team, or a Met fan can't. Well, you just can't. They didn't leave us. The Mets never left me, so I can't really stop rooting for them just because I moved out to San Francisco. Sometimes it's very difficult. It used to be much more when the internet and cable didn't make it so easily accessible to follow your team. We used to have to wait for the sporting news to come out with week-old stats to see what was happening. And,
that's absolutely true. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
You've witnessed a change from print media to internet media over the years. Better, worse? What are we missing? Just the feel of the paper? What is it from your standpoint?
Well, I'm an old school guy. I get the Tampa Bay Times and the New York Times every single morning. And I don't know what my life would be if at 7 o'clock I wasn't in bed, you know, reading the newspaper. You know, it's just what I do every single day. I mean, it's a fairly important part of my life. You know, back when I started out, the book business was much sort of easier for any writer than it is today. When I started out, I was allowed to, you know, given money for writing books about not only the New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers, but I also wrote team histories of the St. Louis Cardinals, of the Chicago Cubs, of the New York Mets.
Yes,
I did one actually for the Dallas Cowboys. And I was able to do that. And I was able to do that because there were many, many, many independent bookstores. What happened then, two things happened. The first thing that happened is that Barnes & Noble happened. And Barnes & Noble, in its wisdom, moved its stores usually across the street from the independent bookstores. And after a year or so, when they purposely charged lesser prices, even not making a profit prices, so that they could close down the opposition, the independent bookstores just started to close, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And what that meant was that no longer would a publisher give me money to do a book about a team. The only thing that they would give me money for was to do a book that had a nationwide audience. Because, for instance, what used to happen when I did my book, Wrigleyville, about the Cubs, every independent bookstore in Chicago would take 100 copies of Wrigleyville. And I would go from independent bookstore to independent bookstore and sign autographs and talk and sell a hell of a lot of books. But when all of those independent bookstores closed, all you had left was Barnes & Noble. And Barnes & Noble was ruled by headquarters. And headquarters determined that every bookstore would get 2 books. And then once you sold the 2 books, you'd get 2 more books. So what does that mean? That means you cannot be successful writing a book about only one team or town. And that was one of the changes. Now, of course, the other change is to do with Amazon.com. And the problem with Amazon,
Kindle and what have you, is that?
And all of that is fine. I mean, you make money if they download a Kindle. I still make some money. That's perfectly fine. But what now happens is that people now have the opportunity to go on Amazon and to go on abebooks.com, and they can generally buy one of my books used for $2. And they could do that fairly soon after a book comes out. And you can figure out what that does to you. It makes it much more difficult to sell books. And those are the two things that have happened to the book industry in the last 20 years.
Gotcha. That very concise. Very concise. Mm-hmm. We were going to talk tonight about Yankee Dynasty.
We'll talk about the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Giants.
The Dodgers, the Giants, all of it. And you want to, when I suggested, you asked me what I want to talk about, as is the way we produce. I said I want to honor Jim Gilliam and Gil McDougald. Of course, the Giants, the Yankees and the Dodgers were full of Hall of Famers. Giants too, on a smaller level, of course. Right. But those players, as far as I'm concerned, were almost every bit deserving. Gilliam as much as Reese deserving of the Hall of Fame. If Reese is, Gilliam is, I think. But their versatility made it possible for DeRocher and Stengel to juggle a little bit, change from year to year, depending on who was coming up in their fertile system. Can you give me some? I know, for instance, that the Yankees won three different world championships with McDougald playing one at third base, one at shortstop, and one at second base as the regular.
That's absolutely true. And the other fella who was equally important wasn't Gilliam, who usually played second base, but was Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson won one pennant playing first base. That was in 1947. He won another pennant playing second base. He won another pennant playing third base. And he won still another pennant playing left field. The guy, Jackie Robinson, was just amazing. I mean, Gilliam was a fine player. There's no two ways about it. But if you want to talk about versatility, the guy you really want to talk about is Jackie Robinson.
Very, very good points. Because you think of him as a regular, you don't think of him as in different positions. He was. And he moved
he
over.
Absolutely was. He was
great,
amazing. Jackie Robinson was amazing in so many ways. If you really think about it, still to this day, it just boggles my mind what that man had to do. Now, in 1947, nothing was integrated. I mean, literally nothing. Nothing was integrated. The blacks had to sit in the back of the bus. The blacks had to drink in colored drinking fountains. They could only go to colored restrooms. They could not eat in any of the white restaurants. When Jackie played for the Kansas City Monarchs, it drove him crazy because he would drive the bus of the team would drive up to a gas station, and they'd fill the tank with gas, and the players would want to go to the bathroom, and they wouldn't let him do it. They wouldn't let him do it until finally Jackie said to one of these guys, because there was a large tank on that bus. He said, "If you don't let us go to the bathroom, we're going to go someplace else for gas." And the guy put two and two together and decided, well, I'd rather have the money for the gas, go to the bathroom.
Right.
And that was Jackie.
I see.
That was Jackie's doing. And so when he played in Montreal, and Ricky was brilliant, of course, because Montreal had no racism at all. Montreal clearly was in Canada. And so they loved him there. There was no any sort of Jim Crow in Canada. Of course, the problems he had was when he went to places like Baltimore and Louisville and towns in the South where the Montreal Royals had to play. I mean, that certainly was difficult. And
well,
then
where you live in Tampa, in St. Pete, the Yankees and Cardinals both shared spring training down there, and this is as late as the '60s when Elston Howard couldn't sleep in the same hotel. Bill White couldn't sleep in the same hotel.
Well, the Yankees. While we're talking about St. Pete, the Yankees left St. Pete just for that reason. They were
really?
fed up. Absolutely. Topping went to Fort Lauderdale because he found people in Fort Lauderdale willing to let Elston Howard stay at the same hotel and eat at the restaurant with his teammates. And he built himself a ballpark, a spring training ballpark in Fort Lauderdale. And so the Yankees were there, I think, late 60s through, fairly recently, until Steinbrenner took them to Tampa.
The Cardinals, basically.
The Cardinals, in one of the books that I wrote, which was called The Spirit of St. Louis, Lindbergh will have to forgive me because I stole his title. But unfortunately for Lindbergh, you cannot copyright a title. So I stole it with great willingness. At any rate,
being given the fact that he was a former Nazi,
given the fact that he was a former Nazi, yes.
Good.
I'll tell you something. If you ever watch that movie, The Spirit of St. Louis, with Jimmy Stewart, it just sends chills up my spine every time I see it. And when you see the newsreels of Lindbergh landing in Paris that day with all those thousands of cars with their lights on as he lands, it's just marvelous. It's just incredible. And so, he was a Nazi sympathizer. But in 1927, he was clearly the most famous man in the world, and what he did was truly, truly amazing. At any rate, in the Spirit of St. Louis, Bill White was kind
But when you stole the title, you weren't thinking that. You were thinking Nazi sympathizer, weren't you?
Yeah, of course I was, but so what?
Good. Thank you. That's all I wanted.
Yeah.
We're brethren.
Yes. So at any rate, so Bill White and the Cardinals are training in St. Petersburg, and he is there, with some, Lou Brock, the great Cardinal
Kurt
pitcher,
Flood.
Bob Gibson, Kurt Flood. They've got fabulous African American players, and the Yacht Club of St. Petersburg only invites the white players from the Cardinals. which really pisses Bill off. And they do other things, too. Like the African Americans are not allowed to swim in the hotel swimming pool. They're not allowed to at the public beaches. It's like, no blacks, dogs, and Jews allowed, kind of thing in St. Petersburg. Right. And the fabulous thing about that, fabulous for Bill, not for St. Petersburg, was that when he was the National League president, when Bill White was the National League president, it was clear that the San Francisco Giants were about to be sold to a guy from Tampa Bay, from Tampa. He was going to buy the team and move the team into what's now the Trop in St. Petersburg.
Was this Piazza's dad? Or
no, this was a car dealer, somebody like that. This was.
Oh, okay.
I'm not exactly sure who it was. I think it was one of the. I can't think of his name at the moment, but he was a fairly wealthy car dealer at the time. But the point is this: is that when Bill White found out that his beloved San Francisco Giants were about to be sold to, St. Petersburg, yeah, he said, "Over my dead body." And he went out and he found Peter, the fellow who
Lurie?
Actually,
Lurie,
no.
Peter Herseth.
It's a long name. It begins with an M. It's a 3-syllable name. This fella, he bought the Giants out from under the people in St. Petersburg, and he kept the Giants in San Francisco. And that was Bill White's doing. Amazingly enough. That's how close the San Francisco Giants were to moving to St. Petersburg.
Right. A couple of times they've lost referendums and were about to go. They were about to go to Toronto once.
Well, I mean, St. Petersburg, every ball club that wanted a new stadium used moving to St. Petersburg as their excuse. Minnesota was going to move it to St. Petersburg until they built them a new ballpark. Chicago was going to move to St. Petersburg until Chicago built them a new ballpark.
Right.
And there were two or three others. Finally, in 1999, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays became an expansion team. And as you know, they were one of the truly terrible, terrible teams in baseball for a long, long time. But that's not the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Yankees. We were going to talk about the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Giants.
But first I have to ask you the effect that Madden had on Tampa Bay and how much his losing them affected the franchise.
You want to know the truth?
Yeah.
Tampa Bay doesn't draw flies because in the last, say, 7 or 8 years, the team has been underfunded. And so what they have been doing is they've been building a team around pitching and defense, because pitching and defense is cheaper than hitting. So what you have is you have a team that will beat a team 3-2 or 4-1 or 1-0, and it doesn't generate the excitement that the big boys generate because they've got hitters. And I think this year, finally, the Rays figured that out. They have acquired 3 or 4, Corey Dickerson they acquired from Colorado. They acquired Steve Pearce. They signed him. He had been with Baltimore and continually would beat the Rays with his own home runs when he was with Baltimore. They got this fella, Miller, who's a shortstop from Seattle, who's got more pop than any shortstop they've ever had before. And they got 4 or 5 guys who can hit this year better than anybody we had before. So getting back to Madden, because Madden left before this year. So the only two managers that I can remember who had an influence on attendance, one was Casey Stengel with the New York Mets. When the Mets started in 1962, Casey Stengel was the manager. Now, he had won 8 pennants in 10 years with the Yankees, and they fired him because he was 70 years old. And they had fired George Weiss as well, and the Mets hired both Weiss and Stengel. And Stengel was such a huge personality that people didn't care that the Mets only won, what they win, first year, they were
games,
40
yes.
and 120. I mean, it's truly one of the worst teams in all of baseball. But for 5, 6, 7 years, the Mets outdrew the Yankees because of Stanton.
Right.
And the other manager who seemed to have a way, actually there were two more managers I'll mention. One was Leo DeRocher, who was this outspoken manager of the New York Giants for a lot of years, and he went to Houston and a couple other places. I think he was with the Cubs for 1 year. He may have been the manager of the Cubs in '69.
They almost won in '69 with him.
Yeah, well, he apparently, played his starters every single game, and at the end of September, they all got exhausted, and they blew the pennant.
Was that it? Yeah, he was a win now kind of guy.
Yes.
I bet the other one was Billy Martin.
That was the third one. Billy Martin certainly was the third one. Wherever Billy went, the teams won. He was incredibly, incredibly successful and important and such great copy. Billy's only failing, I have to say, and I knew him very, very well, was that he was a Yankee. And all that mattered to him was that he was a Yankee. And what that meant was that he would be hired by George Steinbrenner. And Steinbrenner, of course, who was the sadist, would figure out ways to get Billy, really on the edge so that Billy would do something. Get drunk and do something, punch somebody out. I mean, he was always doing something. And so 5 times, George Steinbrenner fired Billy Martin. And oddly enough, and I know this is true because Clete Boyer, who was one of his coaches, told me so, is that if Billy hadn't died on Christmas Eve of 1989, he would have been coming back. He would have come back to the Yankees a 6th time in 1990. Which is really, really amazing.
That is
but wherever
amazing.
he went, Minnesota. Well, first he started in Denver, in AAA. Minnesota sent him to his AAA team in Denver, and Greg Nettles played on that team. And Nettles told me the difference that Billy Martin made as a manager. He told me that Billy Martin taught him how to play, as he did to an awful lot of players. The hard-nosed players.
Billy Sample told me that with Texas, yes.
Yeah. Lenny Randall, who's a good friend of mine, was with Billy in Texas. He's trying now. He's doing everything he can to get Billy into the Hall of Fame, and I'm with him. Yeah. And he did it with Detroit. He took Detroit places. Billy's problem, of course, was that he was always overreaching. He always felt he was smarter than his general manager, and quite frankly, he was. But the problem, of course, is when you let the general manager know that you're smarter than he is, what ends up happening in the end is you get fired. And so he got fired in Minnesota. He got fired in Detroit. He got fired in Texas. He got fired.
But he had demons too that can't be denied that led to a lot of this. I mean, he was Steinbrenner was cruel to hook into them, but others.
Look. When he went to Oakland,
showing up for the playoffs.
Come on. When Billy went to Oakland, and turned the Oakland team into a tremendous competitor, and they called it Billy Ball.
Billy Ball.
He could have stayed there for 10 years, and he could have been the governor of the state of California had he done that. But in his either second or third year, he gets a call from George Steinbrenner, who says to him, "If you can get yourself fired, I will hire you back as manager of the Yankees." And so what does Billy do? He rips up the clubhouse. He calls the owner of the Oakland A's a Jew bastard, and he gets himself fired, only to be brought back to the Yankees again, where, of course, he was abused by Steinbrenner and, fired again and again and again and again. So,
what a character, Steinbrenner, to be such an enigma. I hear stories of him really helping people that are down and out, really being magnanimous. Am I right about that?
No question about it. No, he was the most philanthropic person to live in Tampa. He helped widows of killed policemen. He gave $100,000 a year to the Florida Orchestra. There is a school now, Steinbrenner High School in Tampa.
Right.
They loved the guy. He was such an incredibly sort of double personality person, you know.
Right.
But
had he owned a football team, the rah-rah thing would have gone over much, much better.
But he would have fired his football coach every year the same way. I mean, in 20 years, he had 22 coaches or managers. It was the stupidest thing you could ever imagine. Nobody was ever good enough for George Steinbrenner. It's like Donald Trump right now when they say to him, who do you consult with? Trump says, I talk to myself. He and Steinbrenner, the same guy. They're the same guy. Nobody can do it better than either of them. Just ask them.
Right.
And that's who Steinbrenner was. He had general managers, but he had no respect for anybody who worked for him. And he treated them terribly.
I remember Al Rosen really was at odds with...
Al Rosen and he, when, you know, George came from Cleveland. That's where he came from. He tried to buy the Cleveland Indians first, but he had owned a basketball team, the Cleveland Pipers. And one of the other owners of the Cleveland Pipers was a guy by the name of Stouffer. You know Stouffer Foods?
Yes.
You know Stouffer Foods, frozen foods?
Yeah.
Anyhow, the Pipers ended up losing money. And at one point, George got a blank check of Stouffer's, the kid, and signed $25,000. Forged a check for $25,000 on Stouffer's bank account. And when the old man found out, he was absolutely freaking livid. George was like 33, 34 years old at the time he did that. And guess who owned the Cleveland Indians at the time George wanted to buy it? Stouffer's father.
Oh.
So when George wanted to buy the Cleveland Indians, Stouffer's father said, over my dead body will you buy the Cleveland Indians. And that's how it came that he went to buy the New York Yankees.
Now, how did he sent him a blank check for something else? Just fill it out. He just.
No. He went in and he stole a check and filled it out. No, he went to Stouffer's house.
He literally stole a check from the guy's checkbook.
Oh yeah, stole the check out of the guy's checkbook. Right.
This is Steinbrenner, George Steinbrenner.
Yeah. George Steinbrenner.
I just want that on read. That's something that makes.
One of the books I wrote was called George. You know, George whatever the he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. George.
All you have to do is say one word, George. You know,
George.
Knows who,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
No,
he was a very complicated man, Steinbrenner, and anybody who worked for him at his peril. You know, he treated people terribly. And the one thing
was it because his dad was a jerk to him? I know his dad had this shit.
Yeah. No, that's right. His dad treated him terribly. His dad fired him all the time. His dad would fire him. One time, his dad took the desk, the contents of his desk in his office at American Ship, and drove to George's house and dumped the drawer with the stuff in it on the front porch and told him he was fired. Of course, he never stayed fired. But it was always a humiliation. The father was always humiliating George, always. No matter what George did, it was never, ever good enough. He was a track.
Isn't that interesting how that's passed on? Yeah.
Oh, it's very interesting. His father was a track star. His father could have run in the Olympics. And George wanted to be a track star and actually won races at Williams College. But George wasn't, he wasn't even close to being Olympic caliber. So he could never, ever be as good as his father.
We're getting to the end because
we are.
We are. But I want to ask you.
Time for dinner. It's dinner time.
When you said track star came to mind, Marty Glickman. Did you know Marty Glickman?
I knew him very well. I loved him. Marty was a wonderful, wonderful man. I'll tell you what, next week we'll talk about what happened to Marty in the 36 Olympics. It's one of the great times. If you go to the new movie called Race, which is about Jesse Owens, you will see what happened to Marty Glickman.
Oh, I can't wait to do that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to tell you, we always joke, Newtown High School here, right? Marty Glickman did a broadcast of the New York, in the Bay Area, in New York, Queens. Newtown played for the city championship in soccer, and Marty Glickman did that game. Marty Glickman was the most versatile working guy.
He did Knicks basketball. He did New York Giants football. He did high school football, high school soccer, high school
soccer,
basketball.
Newtown High School. Mr. Dombrowski was the coach of the soccer team when I went to Newtown. And Marty Glickman is doing the game. It was just I can't wait till next week. We'll talk Marty Glickman.
What a wonderful. In 1980, I had a radio talk show on WOR for about 9 months, and Marty was on that station at the time, and we became very close. And he was absolutely most wonderful person you ever could imagine. And we'll talk about what happened to him in the 1936 Olympics.
Same time, same place next week. Thank you, sir.
All right. My pleasure.
All right, Peter. That was Peter Golenbock, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. And you can check us out at comfortablyzoned.com. We're sponsored by Tally's Glycerin Soap. Go to the website, look under sponsors, see her beautiful work, and contact her. If you like soap, like gift items, this, that, and the other thing. And I like doing this show. I like doing podcast radio. Thrilled to have Peter as a regular guest, a regular show. It's his show. And I just glow. That's all. This is a dream come true. I'm Walter Mitty. I'm a Walter Mitty kind of guy. Enjoy, everybody. Hang in there. Keep on keeping on. Remember, it's life's a roller coaster, up, down, shakes around a little bit. Try to keep it on an even keel emotionally, and don't let them know when you're up. Don't let them know when you're down. Be good, everybody. Over and out.